She lost the money for her triplets' birthday. The hotel manager asked her to clean the hotel pots. At the next table, the billionaire CEO silently watched. He was the man who had abandoned her. What he did next shocked everyone. "Hi, my beautiful family. Today my heart bows in prayer for every woman among us. May the Creator cover you in unshakable strength, clothe you in dignity, and crown you with peace. May the mothers who give life be honored beyond measure. The sisters who stand as pillars never fall. The wives who love with patience be surrounded by joy. And the daughters who bring hope shine brighter than the stars. You are God's masterpiece, the soul of every home, the light that keeps this world alive. If your heart agrees, write present. If your love is true, write, I am with Mr. Peter. Sometimes the worst moments of your life begin with the softest sound, like the gentle beep of a card reader that might as well be a death knell, announcing the end of everything you've worked to build. Teresa. Newman's hands trembled as she stared at the glowing red words on the payment terminal. Transaction declined. The elegant hotel restaurant buzzed around her with the quiet conversations of wealthy patrons, their laughter and clinking glasses creating a soundtrack to her humiliation. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across white tablecloths, while servers glided between tables carrying plates that probably cost more than Teresa made in a week. At their corner table, her 3 8-year-old sons, Tristan, Gareth and Owen, sat frozen in their chairs, watching their mother's face crumble like a sandcastle hit by an unexpected wave. "Ma'am, is there a problem with your payment?" The hotel manager's voice cut through the ambient noise like a knife through silk, deliberately loud enough for nearby tables to hear. His pristine uniform bore the subtle marks of authority, the gold name tag that read Guest Services Manager, the perfectly pressed shirt that spoke of privilege and power. His condescending smile marked him as the type of man who took pleasure in others' misfortune, who collected moments of others' weakness like trophies. Teresa's throat constricted as she became aware of the curious glances from neighboring tables. This birthday dinner had taken months of saving, cutting corners on everything from groceries to utilities, skipping her own meals to ensure her boys could have one perfect evening. She had clipped coupons and worked extra shifts at the diner, had sold her grandmother's jewelry to afford the down payment on their school clothes this year. She had wanted them to feel special just once, to experience the kind of celebration other children took for granted, to taste what it felt like to be wealthy and carefree for a single evening. Now that dream was dissolving in front of dozens of witnesses, each one a reminder of how far she still had to climb. "I'm sure there's just a mistake," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the restaurant's ambient noise. "Could you please try running it again?" The manager's lips curved into a cruel smile that never reached his cold eyes. "This is the 3rd attempt, ma'am. The card shows insufficient funds." He paused, letting the words sink in and watching her face crumble before, adding with false concern, "Perhaps you should have verified your balance before ordering. Champagne and prime rib for a table of 4. Heat flooded Teresa's cheeks like acid. She hadn't ordered champagne, just sparkling cider for the boys' birthday toast, the cheapest celebratory drink on the menu. But pointing that out would only draw more attention to their situation, would make her seem defensive and desperate. Around them, conversations had quieted as other diners began to notice the commotion, their forks pausing halfway to their mouths as they watched the drama unfold. Tristan, her eldest by 3 minutes, reached across the table and squeezed her hand with fingers that seemed too small to carry such wisdom. His dark eyes, so mature for his 8 years, reflected a pain that no child should understand, the pain of watching his mother's dignity stripped away in public. "Mom, it's okay. We can just have cake at home like we always do." "No," Teresa said firmly, though her voice shook with the effort of maintaining composure. "This is your birthday. You deserve this celebration. All 3 of you deserve to feel special today." The manager cleared his throat impatiently, checking his expensive watch with theatrical precision. Ma'am, we need to resolve this situation expeditiously. The table has been occupied for over an hour, and we have other guests waiting. Our reservation book is completely full this evening. Teresa looked at the untouched birthday cake in the center of the table. Its 8 colorful candles waiting to be lit. The chocolate frosting spelling out "Happy Birthday" in careful script. The boys had been so excited when they walked in, their eyes wide at the crystal chandeliers and linen tablecloths, their voices hushed with awe at the opulence surrounding them. They had taken pictures with her phone, posing seriously like they were visiting a museum of fine living. Now Gareth was blinking back tears, while Owen had gone completely silent, a sure sign he was overwhelmed and retreating into himself. "What are my options?" Teresa asked, her voice steadying as maternal instinct overrode embarrassment. She would endure any humiliation to protect her children from disappointment. The manager's smile widened, revealing teeth that were too white and too perfect. "Well, we do accept alternate forms of payment. Perhaps you could work off the debt in our kitchen. We're always in need of dishwashers, and I'm sure we could arrange something suitable to your circumstances." A collective gasp rippled through the nearby tables like a stone thrown into still water. Teresa felt the weight of every stare, every whispered comment, every judging glance. Women in designer dresses leaned toward their companions, their expressions mixing shock with the kind of schadenfreude that came from witnessing someone else's misfortune. Men in expensive suits shook their heads with the superiority of those who had never worried about a declined credit card. Her sons looked mortified, their special day transforming into a nightmare they would carry forever. But what choice did she have? The bill was already incurred, and she had no other way to pay it. Her credit cards were maxed out from Owen's medical bills last winter when he'd had pneumonia. Her savings account held exactly $37.43. She could call her sister, but Rebecca was struggling just as much and lived 3 states away. "Fine," Teresa said, rising from her chair with as much dignity as she could muster, her chin lifted in defiance even as her heart shattered. "But first, let my boys finish their cake. They've done nothing wrong, and they shouldn't be punished for my financial situation." "I'm afraid that's not how this works," the manager replied, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "The debt must be settled before any additional services are provided. Policy is policy. I'm sure you understand." That's when Teresa noticed him. At a corner table, partially hidden by a decorative pillar, sat a man in an expensive charcoal suit that probably cost more than Teresa's monthly rent. His dark hair was perfectly styled in that effortless way that required professional attention, his strong jaw clean-shaven and authoritative. Even seated, she could tell he was tall and commanding, the kind of presence that naturally drew attention and demanded respect. His table settings suggested he was dining alone, but the remnants of what appeared to be an untouched business dinner indicated he had been meeting with someone who had already left. But it wasn't his obvious wealth or striking appearance that made Teresa's blood freeze in her veins and her heart stop beating entirely. It was his face. Joseph Morgan, the man who had walked out of her life 8 years ago without a word, without an explanation, without ever knowing what he had left behind. The man who had whispered promises in the dark and then vanished like smoke when morning came. The man whose children were sitting at this table, unknowingly in the presence of the father they had never met. Their eyes met across the crowded restaurant, and she saw the exact moment recognition hit him like a physical blow. His face went pale, his hand tightening around his wine glass until she thought it might shatter under the pressure. His lips parted slightly as if he wanted to speak, but no words came. For a moment time seemed suspended, the restaurant fading away, until there were only the two of them staring at each other across 9 years of silence and regret. But Teresa forced herself to look away, to focus on the immediate crisis rather than the ghost from her past, who had just materialized to witness her humiliation. "I'll wash your dishes," she told the manager, her voice gaining strength from the anger that was beginning to replace her shame. "But my sons will stay here and finish their birthday dinner. Absolutely not, the manager replied with bureaucratic satisfaction. Children cannot be left unattended in the dining room. Liability issues, you understand. They would need to accompany you to the kitchen area. Then we'll leave, Teresa said, reaching for her purse with hands that had stopped trembling. Right now. After you've settled your debt, the manager countered smoothly, producing a laminated card from his breast pocket. Which brings us back to the kitchen work. According to hotel policy, outstanding debts must be resolved before departure. Teresa felt trapped, humiliated, and utterly powerless. The whispers around them grew louder, and she could see other patrons pulling out their phones, probably to record her shame for social media entertainment. Her boys were trying so hard to be brave, but she could see the confusion and hurt in their eyes. The way they were shrinking into themselves as they realized their mother was being treated like a criminal. Owen's lower lip was trembling now, his sensitive nature making him the first to break under the pressure. Gareth was clenching his fists, his protective instincts warring with his helplessness. Tristan was studying the adults with the calculating gaze of someone trying to understand how the world could be so cruel to someone who worked so hard just to survive. She was about to accept the manager's terms, about to lead her children toward the kitchen and whatever humiliation awaited them there, when a deep voice cut through the tension like thunder rolling across summer sky. "Excuse me." Joseph Morgan stood beside their table, his imposing frame casting a shadow across the white tablecloth. Up close, he was even more intimidating than Teresa remembered, broader shoulders that spoke of power and authority, deeper lines around his eyes that suggested both wisdom and weariness, an aura of absolute command that made the manager take an involuntary step backward. He moved with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed, someone who had never doubted his place in the world. "There seems to be some confusion here," Joseph said, his voice calm, but carrying an undertone of steel that suggested consequences for those who opposed him. "I'd like to settle this table's bill immediately." The manager's demeanor changed instantly, his hostile expression replaced by obsequious deference. "Of course, Mr. Morgan, right away, sir. It would be our absolute pleasure to assist you." "No," Teresa said sharply, finally finding her voice and her spine. "We don't need your charity." Joseph's eyes met hers, and for a moment the restaurant faded away again. In his gaze she saw regret, pain, and something that might have been love, but it was 9 years too late and built on a foundation of abandonment that no amount of money could repair. "It's not charity," he said quietly. His voice meant only for her ears. "It's the least I can do." "We don't want anything from you," Teresa replied, her voice carrying 8 years of hurt and anger and sleepless nights, wondering why she hadn't been enough to make him stay. But even as she spoke, she was aware of her sons watching this exchange with curious eyes. They didn't know who this stranger was, or why their mother's entire body had gone rigid with tension, why her voice had taken on that particular tone that meant adult complications they wouldn't understand. Joseph turned to the manager, whose face had gone from arrogant to nervous in the span of seconds. "What's the total for their table?" Well, Mr. Morgan, it's approximately $250, but given the circumstances—" "Done!" Joseph pulled out his wallet and handed over a black credit card that caught the light like obsidian. "And I'd like to speak with you privately about your customer service policies." The manager's eyes widened as he recognized the exclusive card, the kind that came with no spending limits and suggested wealth beyond imagination. "Sir, I was simply following standard protocol." "Your protocol," Joseph said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout, "involves humiliating a mother in front of her children on their birthday? Your protocol involves suggesting a woman wash dishes to pay for a meal in front of a room full of strangers. Your protocol includes threatening children with hunger because their mother's credit card was declined." The manager began to stammer an apology, but Joseph held up a hand that silenced him immediately. "Process the payment. Bring these boys their birthday cake with fresh candles. New candles, not the ones that have been sitting out. Sing happy birthday like you mean it. Bring them ice cream and whatever else they want from your dessert menu. And if I ever hear of you treating another customer with such disrespect, you'll be looking for a new job before the week is out. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, sir." "Absolutely, sir." "Right away, sir." As the manager scurried away like a scolded child, Teresa felt a complex mix of emotions: relief, gratitude, and overwhelming anger at needing to be rescued by the one man she never wanted to see again. "Please sit down," Joseph said gently to the boys, who had been watching the exchange with wide eyes and growing understanding that this stranger had just saved their birthday. "This is your celebration. Don't let anyone take that away from you." Tristan, ever the protective older brother, looked between Joseph and his mother with the wisdom of someone who had learned to read adult emotions out of necessity. "Are you a friend of Mom's?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Teresa saw Joseph's throat work as he swallowed hard, his eyes never leaving her face, searching for some indication of how to answer. "We knew each other a long time ago," he said carefully, his voice gentle in a way that made Teresa's chest ache with memories she had buried deep. The manager returned with a new waiter, a sommelier, and what appeared to be half the kitchen staff, all eager to make amends for their colleagues' behavior. They quickly lit fresh candles on the boys' cake and led the entire dining room in singing "Happy Birthday" with an enthusiasm that bordered on theatrical. The other patrons, perhaps feeling guilty for their earlier gawking, clapped enthusiastically as Tristan, Gareth, and Owen made their wishes and blew out the candles with the pure joy that only children could summon after trauma. Throughout the mini-celebration, Teresa was acutely aware of Joseph standing nearby, his presence both comforting and deeply unsettling. She caught him watching the boys with an intensity that made her stomach clench with a terrible suspicion, his gaze lingering on their faces with the kind of recognition that spoke of blood calling to blood. When the cake was finished and the boys were comparing their small gifts from her, carefully, chosen tokens that had cost her grocery money but brought them joy, Joseph approached the table again. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," he said formally, his businessman's mask sliding back into place. Then to Teresa, he added in a lower voice that carried the weight of unfinished conversations, "Could I speak with you for a moment?" "No," Teresa replied firmly, gathering her purse and helping the boys with their coats, her movements sharp with the need to escape. "We're leaving. Teresa, please. Just 5 minutes." The sound of her name on his lips after all these years made her pause, but only for a moment. "You lost the right to speak to me 8 years ago when you disappeared without so much as a goodbye." She stood and took Owen's hand, nodding for Tristan and Gareth to follow. As they walked toward the exit, she could feel Joseph's eyes on them, studying, calculating, realizing. She could practically hear the wheels turning in his brilliant mind as he processed what he was seeing. At the restaurant's entrance, Teresa paused and turned back one final time. Joseph was still standing by their table, his face pale and his hands clenched at his sides, his expensive suit rumpled from the evening's drama. When their eyes met across the crowded restaurant, she saw something that terrified her more than his sudden reappearance in her life. She saw recognition dawning in his eyes as he looked at her 3 sons, saw him counting back the years, calculating ages and possibilities, saw the devastating truth beginning to take hold in his sharp mind. Joseph Morgan was finally putting the pieces together, and Teresa knew with bone-deep certainty that their carefully constructed life was about to be turned upside down. Chapter 2. The shocking truth. The rain that had threatened all evening finally began to fall as Teresa hurried her sons toward the bus stop. each drop feeling like an accusation against her skin. "Mum, why were you upset with that nice man?" Owen asked, his small hand warm in hers as they walked quickly down the sidewalk. "He helped us." Teresa's heart hammered against her ribs as she heard the hotel's main entrance open behind them, followed by the sound of expensive shoes on wet pavement. She didn't need to turn around to know Joseph was following them. "Sometimes grown-ups have complicated history," she said, pulling the boys closer as they reached the bus shelter. "It doesn't matter now." But even as she spoke the words, she knew they were a lie. It mattered more than anything, because Joseph Morgan wasn't just any man from her past. He was the father of her children, even if he had never known they existed. "Teresa, please." Joseph's voice came from behind them, closer than she had expected. "Just let me explain." She spun around, her protective instincts flaring. "Stay away from us." But Joseph was already looking past her, to where Tristan, Gareth, and Owen stood huddled together under the bus shelter's overhang. In the harsh fluorescent light, their features were thrown into sharp relief, the strong jawline they had inherited, the dark eyes that mirrored his own, the way they all tilted their heads when curious. Teresa watched in growing horror as Joseph's face went through a transformation she recognized all too well. It was the same expression she had seen in the mirror 9 years ago when she first held her newborn sons and realized how much they looked like their father. "Oh my God," Joseph whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. "They're mine." "Keep your voice down," Teresa hissed, glancing back at the boys, who were comparing the small toys she had given them. Oblivious to the adult drama unfolding nearby, Joseph's legs seemed to give out, and he leaned heavily against the bus shelter's metal frame. "They're 8 years old. The timing—" "Teresa, why didn't you tell me?" "Tell you?" Teresa's voice rose before she caught herself and lowered it to a furious whisper. "Tell you what?" "You disappeared without a word. No goodbye, no explanation, no forwarding address. I woke up one morning and you were gone like you had never existed." "I had to leave," Joseph said, running his hands through his hair, disturbing its perfect styling. "My father was dying and the company was in crisis. I couldn't—" "You couldn't what? Write a note? Send a text? Give me some indication that I meant more to you than a one-night stand?" Joseph's eyes flashed with pain. "You meant everything to me. You still do." "Don't." Teresa held up a hand to stop him. "Don't you dare stand there and rewrite history. You left because I wasn't part of your world." A struggling waitress wasn't good enough for Joseph Morgan, heir to a billion-dollar empire. "That's not true," Joseph protested. "But Teresa wasn't finished. I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after you vanished. 3 weeks of calling your number and getting a disconnected message. 3 weeks of going to your apartment and finding it empty. I had to accept that you were gone and that I was going to raise our children alone." The word children seemed to hit Joseph like a physical blow. He looked again at the triplets, and Teresa saw his sharp mind doing the calculations, piecing together the timeline, understanding the magnitude of what he had missed. "Triplets," he breathed. "Identical triplets." "No," Teresa corrected sharply. "They're fraternal. Tristan and Gareth are identical to each other, but Owen is different. He was smaller when they were born, needed more care." Joseph's eyes fixed on Owen, the smallest of the three, who was currently showing his brothers a trick with his small toy car. "I missed everything. Their first steps, their first words, their first day of school." "Yes, you did," Teresa said without mercy. "You missed sleepless nights and doctor visits and parent-teacher conferences. You missed bedtime stories and scraped knees, and the time Owen had pneumonia and almost—" She stopped herself, not wanting to give Joseph any more ammunition for guilt. "I would have come back," Joseph said desperately, "if I had known." "But you didn't know, because you didn't care enough to leave a way for me to contact you. So don't stand there and act like you're the victim in this." The bus arrived with a hiss of air brakes and a spray of puddle water. Teresa quickly gathered her sons, grateful for the escape route. "Come on, boys." Our bus is here." As they climbed aboard, she heard Joseph call out behind them. "Teresa, wait. We need to talk about this properly." She paused at the bus door, turning back to face him one last time. "No, we don't. My sons have lived 8 years without a father, and they're doing just fine. They don't need someone who treats people like obligations to be managed when convenient." "They're my sons too," Joseph said, his voice carrying over the bus engine. Teresa's blood turned to ice. "No," she said with deadly calm. "They're my sons. You're just the man who donated genetic material." The bus door closed, with a pneumatic wheeze cutting off Joseph's response. As they pulled away from the curb, Teresa caught a glimpse of him, standing alone in the rain, looking broken and lost. On the bus, the boys chatted excitedly about their birthday adventure, already transforming the evening's drama into an exciting story. They had no idea that their entire world had just shifted on its axis. "Mom," Tristan said as they swayed with the bus's movement, "that man seemed sad. Do you think he's okay?" Teresa closed her eyes, fighting back the emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. "He'll be fine, sweetheart. Some people have to deal with the consequences of their choices." "What does that mean?" Gareth asked. "It means that sometimes, when people do bad things, they feel bad about it later," Teresa explained carefully. "But feeling bad doesn't undo the hurt they caused." Owen, perceptive as always, studied his mother's face. "Are you hurt, Mom?" Teresa pulled him closer, breathing in the scent of his hair and trying to memorize this moment before everything changed. Because despite her brave words, she knew Joseph wouldn't simply walk away. Not now that he knew the truth. "A little," she admitted. "But I have you 3, and that makes everything better." The boys seemed satisfied with this answer and returned to their toys and quiet conversation. Teresa stared out the rain-streaked window and tried to prepare herself for the storm that was coming. Over the next few days, the expensive gifts began arriving. First came a massive toy robot that transformed into a truck, delivered to their apartment building with a card, signed simply J. Teresa returned it immediately, not even opening the box. Then came matching bicycles in the boys' favorite colors, blue, red, and green. Teresa loaded them back into the delivery truck before the boys even saw them. Next were tablets loaded with educational games, winter coats that probably cost more than Teresa made in a month, and a collection of books that would have made any child's eyes light up with wonder. Teresa returned every single item, each package feeling like an invasion of the life she had built for herself and her sons. On the 4th day, Joseph appeared at her apartment door. Teresa opened it just wide enough to glare at him through the security chain. "Go away." "The boys need things," Joseph said, his usually commanding voice uncertain. "I can see their shoes have holes in them. Their coats are too small. Let me help." "We manage just fine without your money," Teresa replied coldly. "This isn't about money. It's about my children having what they need." "They're not your children," Teresa said firmly. "Children are raised by the people who show up every day, not the ones who show up with credit cards when it's convenient." Joseph's jaw tightened. "I want to be part of their lives." "Well, you can't. They have a life, a routine, a sense of security. I won't let you disrupt that just because you've suddenly developed a conscience. Don't I have rights as their father?" The word rights made Teresa see red. "Rights? You want to talk about rights? What about my right to know where you went? What about my right to make an informed decision about my pregnancy? What about my right to not have to work 3 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads while you were building your empire?" Joseph looked stricken. "You work 3 jobs? That's none of your business. It is if you're the mother of my children." Teresa started to close the door, but Joseph put his hand against it, not forcing it, but stopping her from shutting him out completely. "Teresa, I know I hurt you. I know I made terrible mistakes. But those boys deserve to know their father. Those boys deserve to be protected from disappointment and abandonment. You've already proven you're capable of both." "People change," Joseph said quietly. Some do, Teresa agreed. But 9 years is a long time to build a life without someone. We don't have room for you in it anymore. This time, when she closed the door, Joseph didn't try to stop her. But as Teresa leaned against the wood and listened to his footsteps retreat down the hallway, she had the sinking feeling that this conversation was far from over. Late that night, after the boys were asleep, Teresa sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and tried to figure out what to do next. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. I never stopped thinking about what we could have had. I'm sorry I wasn't the man you needed me to be, but I want to try to be that man now." Teresa deleted the message without responding and blocked the number. But when she went to check on her sleeping sons, she found herself studying their faces in the dim light from the hallway. Tristan had Joseph's stubborn chin. Gareth had his confident smile, even in sleep. And Owen, sensitive Owen, had the same thoughtful expression Joseph wore when he was processing difficult information. They were growing up without their father, and despite everything she told herself about protecting them, Teresa couldn't help wondering if she was denying them something important. That night, she dreamed of Joseph standing in the rain, and for the first time in 9 years, she let herself remember why she had fallen in love with him in the first place. Chapter 3. The Hidden Guardian. 3 weeks passed in blessed silence, and Teresa began to hope that Joseph had finally accepted her decision and moved on with his life. But hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. The first sign that her world was still shifting came on a Tuesday morning when Mrs. Rodriguez, her elderly landlord, knocked on her apartment door with an apologetic expression and an envelope in her weathered hands. "Teresa." "Mija, I'm so sorry," Mrs. Rodriguez said, wringing her hands. "I know the rent isn't due until Friday, but I got a call yesterday. Someone paid your rent for the next 6 months in advance." Teresa's blood went cold. "What do you mean someone paid it?" "A man called, said he was a family friend. He wired the money directly to my account before I could even ask questions. I tried to call him back to clarify, but..." Mrs. Rodriguez shrugged helplessly. "Did he give you a name?" Teresa asked, though she already knew the answer. "Morgan, Mr. Joseph Morgan. He said you were going through a difficult time, and he wanted to help without bothering you directly." Teresa's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I need you to return that money. We didn't ask for this help, and we don't want it." The older woman's face fell. "Oh, mija, I already deposited it. My grandson needed surgery, and I used some of it for his medical bills. I thought it was a blessing." Teresa's anger deflated as she saw the genuine distress in Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes. The woman had been struggling financially for years, working as a cleaning lady well into her 70s just to make ends meet. Of course she would see Joseph's money as a godsend. "It's okay," Teresa said softly, forcing a smile. "We'll figure it out." But as she closed the door, Teresa felt a familiar sensation of walls closing in around her. Joseph was finding ways to help her whether she wanted it or not, and she was powerless to stop him without hurting innocent people like Mrs. Rodriguez. The second incident happened at Gareth's school on a Thursday afternoon. Teresa was running late to pick up the boys, having been held up at her second job when a difficult customer refused to accept that the diner was out of apple pie. She arrived at Lincoln Elementary just as the final bell rang, expecting to find her sons waiting by the flagpole as usual. Instead, she found them in the principal's office, looking shell-shocked and upset. "Mrs. Newman," Principal Hayes said, rising from her desk with a concerned expression. "I'm glad you're here. We had an incident today." Teresa's maternal instincts immediately went into overdrive. "What kind of incident? Are the boys hurt?" "Not physically," Principal Hayes assured her. "But there was a confrontation during lunch. Some older students were making comments about your sons not having a father figure. The situation escalated when one boy made a particularly cruel remark about Owen. Teresa looked at her youngest son, who was sitting between his brothers with tear tracks still visible on his cheeks. Her heart broke seeing him hurt and knowing she couldn't protect him from this kind of pain. What happened next? Teresa asked, though she dreaded the answer. Well, that's the interesting part, Principal Hayes continued. A man appeared in our cafeteria, someone I've never seen before. He spoke to the bullying children very calmly, but apparently his presence was quite commanding. The children apologized immediately and haven't bothered your sons since. Teresa's stomach dropped. Did this man give you his name? He said he was a family friend who happened to be in the area, Mr. Morgan, I believe. He spoke with our security guard and showed proper identification. Everything seemed legitimate, but I wanted to make sure you were aware. I'm aware, Teresa said grimly. Boys, get your backpacks. We're leaving. As they walked to the bus stop, Teresa struggled with conflicting emotions. Part of her was grateful that someone had protected her children from cruelty, but a larger part was furious that Joseph had involved himself in their lives without permission. Mom, Tristan said as they waited for the bus, who was that man who helped us today? Teresa looked down at her eldest son, seeing Joseph's intelligent eyes staring back at her. What did he say to you? Nothing really, Gareth chimed in. He just asked if we were okay and told us we were brave for standing up for each other. But the big kids got really quiet when he talked to them. He had kind eyes, Owen added softly, like he understood what it felt like to be different. Teresa's throat tightened. Despite her anger, she couldn't deny that Joseph had done something good for her children. That knowledge made her feel even more conflicted about the whole situation. That evening, after the boys were asleep, Teresa called the number Joseph had texted from weeks earlier. She had unblocked it specifically for this conversation. He answered on the first ring, as if he had been waiting for her call. Teresa? You need to stop, she said without preamble. Stop what? Stop paying our rent. Stop showing up at their school. Stop inserting yourself into our lives. There was a long pause before Joseph responded. I can't do that. Yes, you can. It's called respecting boundaries. My children were being bullied, Joseph said, and Teresa could hear the controlled anger in his voice. Some kid told Owen that he was weak because he didn't have a daddy to protect him. What was I supposed to do, walk away? Teresa closed her eyes, feeling the fight drain out of her. How did you even know about it? I've been watching, Joseph admitted. From a distance. I know you don't want me involved, but I can't just pretend they don't exist. They're my sons, Teresa. They don't know that, Teresa said sharply. And I want to keep it that way. Why? What are you so afraid of? The question hit her like a slap. I'm afraid of them getting attached to someone who's going to leave them. I'm afraid of them thinking they're not enough just the way they are. I'm afraid of history repeating itself. I'm not going anywhere, Joseph said with quiet conviction. You said that before, Teresa replied. 9 years ago, you said you weren't going anywhere. You said I was the best thing that ever happened to you. You said you wanted to build a life with me, and then you vanished like smoke. I explained, you explained nothing. You gave me excuses. There's a difference. Another long silence stretched between them before Joseph spoke again. I know I hurt you. I know I made choices that caused irreparable damage. But Teresa, those boys are growing up, and they're going to start asking harder questions about their father. Wouldn't it be better if they could meet me on their own terms, instead of finding out about me accidentally? Teresa had been dreading this conversation for years. They think their father didn't want them. What? When they were 5 and started asking questions, I told them their father couldn't be part of their lives. They assumed that meant he didn't want them. I never corrected that assumption because it was easier than explaining that their father didn't even know they existed. Joseph's sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. My God, Teresa, they think I abandoned them on purpose? It seemed kinder than the truth, Teresa said defensively. What truth? That their father was a coward who ran away from the best thing in his life. That he spent 8 years building a business empire to try to fill the hole you left in his heart. That he would have moved heaven and earth to be with you if he had known about them. Teresa's resolve wavered at the raw pain in Joseph's voice, but she couldn't afford to let emotion cloud her judgment. It doesn't matter what you would have done. What matters is what you did do. You left. And my job is to protect my children from people who leave. I won't leave them, Joseph said firmly. I won't leave you. Not again. You don't get to make that promise, Teresa replied. You already broke it once. She hung up before he could respond, but his words echoed in her mind for the rest of the night. The next morning brought another surprise. Teresa arrived at her weekend job at the department store to find her manager, Janet, waiting with a puzzled expression. Teresa, I got the strangest call yesterday, Janet said, pulling her aside before the store opened. Someone called asking about your work schedule and performance. He said he was considering you for a better position at his company. Teresa's heart sank. Did he give you a name? Morgan. He was very professional, asked about your reliability, your customer service skills, your character. I gave you a glowing review, of course, but I thought you should know in case you're job hunting and forgot to mention it. I'm not job hunting, Teresa said through gritted teeth. Oh. Janet looked confused. Well, he seemed very interested in your situation. Asked about your availability for full-time work, what kind of benefits you might need for a family with children. I hope I didn't say anything wrong. You didn't do anything wrong, Teresa assured her, though inside she was seething. Joseph was investigating her life, gathering information about her struggles, probably planning some grand gesture to rescue her and the boys. That weekend, the boys had their first soccer game of the season. Teresa arrived at the field with folding chairs and orange slices, ready to cheer on her sons as they navigated the chaotic world of 8-year-old athletics. She set up her chairs along the sideline with the other parents, most of whom she recognized from previous seasons. The boys were on different teams, Tristan and Gareth on the Eagles, Owen on the Hawks, which meant Teresa spent most games running between fields to catch as much action as possible. Halfway through Tristan's game, she noticed a tall figure standing alone near the parking lot, partially hidden behind a large SUV. Even from a distance, she recognized Joseph's silhouette. He was watching the field intently, his attention focused entirely on Tristan as her son dribbled the ball down the field. Teresa felt a mixture of anger and something dangerously close to longing. Joseph looked so intent, so invested in what was happening on that field. When Tristan scored a goal, she saw Joseph's fist pump in the air before he seemed to catch himself and look around to see if anyone had noticed. After the game, as Teresa was packing up her chairs, she heard footsteps behind her. He's fast, Joseph said quietly. Tristan. He's got good instincts on the field. Teresa didn't turn around. You need to stop coming to their games. I'm not bothering anyone. I'm just watching from a distance. It's creepy, Teresa said, though even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Joseph wasn't lurking or being inappropriate. He was simply a father trying to watch his children play, even if they didn't know he existed. I missed 8 years. Joseph said, his voice thick with emotion. I missed their first steps, their first words, their first day of school. Please don't ask me to miss everything else too. Teresa finally turned to face him, and what she saw in his eyes nearly broke her resolve. He looked haunted, desperate, like a man drowning and begging for a lifeline. This isn't about what you missed, she said softly. It's about what's best for them. What if what's best for them is having their father in their lives? What if what's best for them is being protected from disappointment? They stared at each other for a long moment, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them like a bridge neither was ready to cross. Finally, Joseph nodded and stepped back. I'll try to be more discreet. As he walked away, Teresa realized he hadn't promised to stop coming. He had only promised to be more careful about being seen. That night, as she tucked the boys into bed, Owen asked her a question that made her blood freeze. "Mom, do you think our daddy might be watching us sometimes, even if we can't see him?" Chapter 4. Cracks in the Wall. Lightning split the October sky like God's own signature across the darkness. And Teresa Newman knew this storm would change everything. She stood at the bus stop with Tristan, Gareth, and Owen, watching the evening commuter bus disappear into the distance without stopping. The driver had seen them, she was certain of that, but the rain was coming down in sheets now, and apparently picking up a single mother and 3 children wasn't worth the hassle. "When's the next bus, Mom?" Gareth asked, his voice barely audible over the thunder that followed another lightning flash. Teresa checked her phone, her heart sinking as she saw the schedule. "Not for another hour." The boys huddled closer together under the inadequate shelter of the bus stop, their school clothes already soaked despite her best efforts to keep them dry. Owen was shivering, his lips taking on a pale blue tint that made Teresa's maternal instincts scream with alarm. She pulled out her phone to call a taxi, then remembered her bank account balance and slowly put it away. Even if she could afford the ride, most cab companies wouldn't come to this part of town, especially in weather like this. "We'll walk," she decided, though the distance to their apartment was nearly 2 miles through neighborhoods that weren't particularly safe after dark. "In this rain?" Tristan asked, ever the practical one. "Mom will get soaked." "We're already soaked," Teresa pointed out, trying to keep her voice light. "A little more water won't hurt us." But as they stepped out from under the bus stop's minimal protection, the full force of the storm hit them like a cold, wet wall. The wind whipped Teresa's hair across her face, and she had to grab Owen's hand tighter to keep him from being blown off balance. They had made it less than 3 blocks when the car appeared. Headlights cut through the rain like twin beacons, and Teresa's first instinct was to pull the boys closer to the buildings lining the sidewalk. Strange cars stopping near lone women with children was never a good sign, especially in this neighborhood. But when the black sedan pulled to the curb and the driver's door opened, Teresa's heart stopped beating entirely. Joseph Morgan stepped out into the storm, seemingly oblivious to the rain that immediately plastered his expensive shirt to his chest. In the harsh glare of the streetlights, he looked like some kind of guardian angel, if guardian angels wore $1,000 suits and had the power to make grown men tremble with a single look. "Get in the car," he called over the storm, moving toward them with long, purposeful strides. "No," Teresa said automatically, even as Owen pressed closer to her side and shivered violently. "Teresa, your children are freezing," Joseph said, his voice carrying despite the wind. "This isn't about pride anymore. This is about their safety." As if to emphasize his point, another crack of thunder shook the ground beneath their feet, and Owen let out a small whimper of fear. "Please." "Mom," Gareth said, his teeth chattering audibly. "I'm really cold." "We don't need his help," Teresa insisted, but even she could hear how weak her words sounded against the howling wind. Joseph was close enough now that she could see the determination in his dark eyes, the set of his jaw that she remembered so well from their time together. He looked like a man who had made a decision and wouldn't be swayed from it. "You can hate me all you want once we get them somewhere warm and dry," he said, speaking directly to Teresa now. "But right now, your pride is putting them at risk." The words hit her like a physical blow, because she knew he was right. Owen was shivering so hard he could barely stand, and Tristan's lips were turning blue around the edges. They needed shelter, and Joseph was offering it. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth, "but just to get us home. Nothing more." Joseph nodded and opened the car's rear door, gesturing for the boys to get in. They scrambled inside gratefully, sighing in relief as the warm air from the heater enveloped them. Teresa hesitated at the passenger door, her hand on the handle. Getting into Joseph's car felt like crossing a line she had sworn never to cross again. "Teresa," Joseph said quietly, coming around to stand beside her, "I know you don't trust me, but I would never do anything to hurt them, or you." She met his eyes across the car's roof, and for a moment the years fell away. She could see the young man she had fallen in love with, the one who had held her during thunderstorms and promised her they would weather any storm together. But that was before she knew that promises were just words, and words could be broken as easily as hearts. Teresa got into the car. The drive to their apartment was tense and silent, except for the boys' quiet chatter in the back seat. They were fascinated by the car's leather interior and electronic displays, asking Joseph polite questions about the various buttons and screens. Joseph answered their questions patiently, his voice gentle in a way that made Teresa's chest ache with memories she had worked hard to bury. He had always been good with children, had talked about wanting a family someday. She wondered if he remembered those conversations, if he thought about what might have been. When they reached her building, Joseph parked and turned off the engine, but made no move to get out. "Thank you," Teresa said formally, reaching for her door handle. "Wait," Joseph said, and something in his tone made her pause. "There's something I need to tell you." "Boys, go on up," Teresa said, handing Tristan the apartment keys. "Get into warm clothes and start your homework. I'll be up in a minute." The boys climbed out of the car, still chattering about their adventure, and disappeared into the building. Teresa watched until the elevator doors closed behind them, then turned to face Joseph. "What is it?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Joseph stared through the windshield at the rain streaming down the glass. "I've been helping more than you know." Teresa's stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" "The rent payment wasn't the only thing. When you couldn't make your electric bill last month, I paid it. When Owen needed antibiotics for his ear infection and your insurance wouldn't cover the full cost, I covered the difference. When the boys' school shoes wore out and you were trying to make them last until your next paycheck." "You've been spying on me," Teresa said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I've been watching over my family," Joseph corrected. "There's a difference. They're not your family," Teresa snapped, but the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "They're my children," Joseph said firmly. "And you're the mother of my children. That makes you family whether you like it or not." Teresa's hands were shaking, and she pressed them together in her lap to hide the tremor. "You had no right to do any of that without my knowledge. You would have refused if I had asked." "Exactly. That should have told you something." Joseph finally turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "It told me that you're stubborn and proud and afraid. It didn't tell me that my children should go without basic necessities because their mother can't swallow her pride long enough to accept help. We manage just fine. You work 3 jobs, Teresa. 3 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table? You're exhausted all the time. When was the last time you bought yourself something that wasn't absolutely necessary?" Teresa didn't answer because she couldn't remember. "I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, Joseph continued. "And meanwhile, my children are wearing shoes with holes in them and eating generic cereal for breakfast because their mother is too proud to let their father help provide for them." "You're not their father," Teresa said. But the words came out as a whisper. "Yes, I am," Joseph said with quiet conviction. "I may not have been there for their birth or their first steps or their first day of school, but I am their father. And I want to be part of their lives. It's too late for that." "Says who? Some rule book I've never read? Some law that says a man can't earn his place in his children's lives if he wasn't there from the beginning?" Teresa was quiet for a long moment, watching the rain cascade down the windshield like tears. "What do you want from me, Joseph?" "I want a chance," he said simply. "A chance to prove that I'm not the same man who walked away 9 years ago. A chance to be the father they deserve. A chance to be the man you used to believe I could be. And if I say no," Joseph's jaw tightened, "then I'll respect your decision. But I won't disappear. I'll keep watching from the shadows, making sure they're safe, helping when I can. Because walking away completely isn't an option anymore. Not when I know they exist." Teresa felt trapped between impossible choices. If she let Joseph into their lives, she risked her children's hearts being broken if he decided to leave again. If she refused, she condemned them to a life of unnecessary struggle when help was available. "I need time to think," she said finally. "How much time?" "I don't know. This isn't a business decision, Joseph. This is my children's entire world." Joseph nodded slowly. "I understand. But while you're thinking, can I ask you something?" Teresa waited, though every instinct told her to get out of the car and run. "That night, 9 years ago, when I told you I loved you, did you believe me?" The question hit her like a physical blow, bringing back memories she had spent years trying to forget. "What does it matter now?" "It matters, because I need to know if you think I'm capable of loving them the way they deserve to be loved." Teresa's throat tightened with unshed tears. "I believed you loved me. That's what made it so much worse when you left." "I never stopped loving you," Joseph said quietly. "Even when I tried to convince myself that leaving was for the best, even when I threw myself into work to try to forget you, even when I dated other women hoping to find what we had, I never stopped loving you. Then why didn't you come back? You're Joseph Morgan. You have resources, connections, power. If you wanted to find me, you could have found me." Joseph was quiet for so long that Teresa thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. "Because I was afraid you had moved on. I was afraid you had found someone better, someone who deserved you in ways I never did. I was afraid that coming back would only cause you more pain." "So you decided for both of us," Teresa said, "just like you decided to leave in the first place." "Yes," Joseph admitted, "and I was wrong. About all of it." They sat in silence for several minutes, listening to the rain drum against the car's roof. Finally, Teresa reached for the door handle. "I should go up. The boys will be wondering where I am." "Teresa," Joseph said as she opened the door, "that note Owen passed me at the soccer game. Did you know about it?" Teresa froze. "What note?" Joseph reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a piece of paper that had been folded and unfolded so many times it was soft around the edges. He handed it to Teresa, and with trembling fingers she opened it. In Owen's careful 8-year-old handwriting it read, "Thank you for helping us at school. You have kind eyes like my mom says my daddy would have had. I hope someone is being nice to you too." Teresa's vision blurred, as tears she had been holding back for weeks finally spilled over. "When did he give you this?" "Last week, after the soccer game. He slipped it to me when you weren't looking." Teresa stared at the note, seeing her youngest son's innocence and hope written in crayon and pencil lead. "He doesn't know who you are. I know, but he knows I care about him. They all do, even if they don't understand why." Teresa folded the note carefully and handed it back to Joseph. "Keep it, but don't read too much into it. Owen is kind to everyone." "I know what kind of children you've raised," Joseph said softly, "and I know you did it without any help from me. They're extraordinary because you made them that way." The compliment caught Teresa off guard, and she felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to develop hairline cracks. "I should go," she said again, but she didn't move. "One more thing," Joseph said. "If you decide to give me a chance, it has to be real. I don't want to be their father only when it's convenient for you. I want to be involved in their daily lives, their decisions, their problems, and their victories. I want to be a real parent, not just a weekend visitor or a checkbook." Teresa met his eyes, seeing the sincerity there, the deep well of longing that she recognized because she had felt it herself every time the boys asked about their father. "And if you hurt them?" she asked. "Then you have my permission to destroy me in every way that matters," Joseph replied without hesitation. Teresa got out of the car and stood in the rain for a moment, letting the water wash away the tears on her cheeks. As she walked toward her building, she heard Joseph's window roll down. "Teresa," he called after her. "Thank you for keeping them safe all these years, for raising them to be good people." for giving me sons I can be proud of, even though I didn't earn the right to be." She didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge his words, but as she rode the elevator up to her apartment, Teresa found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop protecting her heart and start protecting her children's future instead. Because the truth was, watching Joseph with the boys tonight had shown her something she hadn't wanted to admit. They needed their father, and despite everything, he needed them too. The question was whether she was brave enough to risk everything on the possibility that some people really could change. Chapter 5. The Secret Mentor. Sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves, and Teresa Newman was about to discover that her carefully constructed world was built on foundations more fragile than morning mist. It started with a casual conversation at the school pickup line on a crisp November afternoon. Teresa was waiting with the other parents, checking her phone for messages from her weekend employer, when Mrs. Patterson, Gareth's teacher, approached with a warm smile. "Mrs. Newman, I wanted to thank you for arranging for Mr. Morgan to volunteer in our reading program," she said, her voice bright with enthusiasm. "The children absolutely adore him, and his one-on-one sessions with struggling readers have been incredibly effective." Teresa's blood turned to ice water. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "The volunteer reading mentor, Mr. Morgan. He's been working with several students, including your boys, for the past 3 weeks. The children have made remarkable progress." Mrs. Patterson's smile faltered as she noticed Teresa's expression. "You did arrange for him to volunteer, didn't you?" "No," Teresa said carefully, trying to keep her voice steady. "I didn't arrange anything." "Oh dear." Mrs. Patterson looked confused and slightly alarmed. "He said he was a family friend who wanted to help. He provided all the proper background check documentation and references. Principal Hayes approved everything personally." Teresa felt the world tilt sideways. "He's been working with my sons for 3 weeks, every Tuesday and Thursday after school, in the library. The boys speak so highly of him. They call him Mr. Joseph and always seem excited for their sessions." Mrs. Patterson paused, clearly sensing that something was very wrong. "Mrs. Newman, if there's a problem, where are they now?" Teresa interrupted, her maternal instincts shifting into high alert. "The library, I believe? Today is Thursday, so—" Teresa didn't wait to hear the rest. She pushed through the crowd of parents and ran toward the school building, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird fighting for freedom. She found them in the corner of the library, sitting around a small table near the picture book section. Joseph was reading aloud from a chapter book while Tristan, Gareth, and Owen listened with rapt attention, their faces glowing with the kind of happiness Teresa had rarely seen at home. Joseph looked different than she had ever seen him, relaxed, patient, genuinely joyful. His expensive suit had been replaced with casual slacks and a button-down shirt. His usually perfect hair was slightly mussed, as if Owen had been playing with it. Most shocking of all, he was smiling with an openness that made him look years younger. And then the dragon realized that he had been guarding the wrong treasure all along, Joseph read, his voice taking on different tones for each character. The real treasure wasn't gold or jewels. It was the family he had been too afraid to claim. The irony of the storyline wasn't lost on Teresa, and she wondered if Joseph had chosen it deliberately. "Mr. Joseph," Gareth said, bouncing slightly in his chair. "Do you think the dragon was scared because he thought his family wouldn't want him?" Joseph paused, his eyes meeting Gareth's with surprising intensity. "I think sometimes people convince themselves they don't deserve good things, so they stay away rather than risk being rejected." "That's silly," Owen chimed in. "If someone loves you, they'll love you no matter what mistakes you made. You're very wise." "Owen," Joseph said softly, and Teresa saw his hand briefly touch her youngest son's hair with infinite tenderness. "But what if the mistakes were really big?" Tristan asked. his serious nature making the question carry more weight than his 8 years should allow. "Then the person has to work extra hard to prove they've changed," Joseph answered. "And they have to be patient while the people they hurt decide whether to forgive them." Teresa realized she was eavesdropping on a conversation that seemed designed specifically for her ears, and the coincidence felt too pointed to be accidental. "Boys," she called out, stepping into view. All 4 heads turned toward her, but the reactions couldn't have been more different. The boys' faces lit up with excitement while Joseph went pale, his expression shifting from joy to guilt to something that might have been hope. "Mom," Owen jumped up and ran to her. "You have to meet Mr. Joseph. He's the best reader in the whole world, and he knows everything about dragons and knights and adventures." "Yeah," Gareth added, following his brother. "And he's really smart. He helped me with my math homework, and now I understand fractions." Tristan approached more slowly, his intuitive nature picking up on the tension between the adults. "Mr. Joseph, this is our mom. Mom, this is Mr. Joseph. He's been helping us with reading." Teresa looked at Joseph over her sons' heads, seeing him through their eyes for the first time. To them, he wasn't the man who had abandoned their mother. He wasn't a billionaire with the power to disrupt their lives. He was simply a kind adult who had shown them attention and patience, who had made them feel special and important. "Hello, Mrs. Newman," Joseph said formally, rising from his chair. "I hope you don't mind that I've been working with the boys. Principal Hayes assured me that all parent volunteers were welcome." The lie was smoothly delivered, but Teresa caught the slight emphasis on parent and knew it was intentional. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Boys, please gather your things. We need to go home." "Oh, Mom," Gareth protested. "We were just getting to the good part of the story. Mr. Joseph was going to teach us how to make paper airplanes," Owen added hopefully. "Another time," Teresa said firmly, though her heart ached at the disappointment in their voices. As the boys reluctantly packed their backpacks, Joseph approached Teresa with cautious steps. "Before you say anything," he said quietly, "let me explain. Explain how you manipulated your way into my children's school. Explain how you've been deceiving them for weeks. Explain how you thought lying to them was a good foundation for a relationship." "I didn't lie to them," Joseph protested. "I never claimed to be anyone other than a volunteer who wanted to help. You're splitting hairs and you know it." Joseph ran a hand through his hair, disturbing its careful styling. "I was trying to find a way to be part of their lives without disrupting the boundaries you set. I thought if I could prove myself capable of being a positive influence. You thought you could manipulate me into accepting you by going behind my back. That's not—" Joseph stopped, his shoulders sagging. "Maybe that is what I was doing. But Teresa, you have to see how they respond to me. They're starving for male attention, for a father figure. I'm not trying to replace you or undermine your authority. I just want to be part of their lives." Teresa glanced at her sons, who were pretending to pack slowly while obviously listening to every word of the adult conversation. "We'll discuss this at home," she told them. "Say goodbye to Mr. Joseph." The boys hugged Joseph with an enthusiasm that made Teresa's chest tighten with conflicting emotions. She could see genuine affection in their faces, real connection that went beyond simple politeness. "Will we see you next week?" Owen asked hopefully. Joseph looked at Teresa, his expression a silent question. "That depends on your mother." "Please, Mom," Gareth added. "Mr. Joseph makes reading really fun, and he promised to finish the dragon story." Teresa felt trapped between her anger at Joseph's deception and her children's obvious happiness. "We'll see," she said, which was parent code for probably not. "But I'm not going to have this fight in public." That evening, after the boys were asleep, Teresa found herself staring at the ceiling and replaying the scene in the library. Despite her anger, she couldn't deny what she had witnessed. Joseph had been genuinely engaged with her children, patient and kind and interested in their thoughts and feelings. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But before you decide whether to let me continue volunteering, ask them what they think of Mr. Joseph. Ask them how the reading sessions make them feel. Then decide what's best for them, not what's easiest for you." Teresa stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. The next morning, she made the boys pancakes for breakfast, a rare weekday treat, and tried to bring up the subject casually. "So," she said, flipping a pancake with perhaps more force than necessary, "tell me about this reading program at school." "Oh, it's the best part of the whole week," Owen said immediately. "Mr. Joseph is so nice, and he never gets impatient when I mess up words. He explains things really well, too," Gareth added. "When I told him I didn't understand why the knight in the story made certain choices, he helped me think about it from the knight's perspective. He said sometimes people do things that seem wrong, but make sense if you understand what they're afraid of." Teresa paused in her pancake flipping. "What did you think about that?" "I thought it was smart," Tristan said quietly. "Sometimes at school kids are mean because they're scared of being picked on themselves. Maybe grown-ups do that too. Mr. Joseph said that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Owen continued. "It means you do the right thing even when you are scared." Teresa served the pancakes with a heavy heart, realizing that Joseph had been teaching her children lessons that went far beyond reading comprehension. "Do you like spending time with Mr. Joseph?" she asked carefully. All three boys nodded enthusiastically. "He listens to us," Gareth explained. "Like really listens. And he remembers things we tell him from week to week." "He asked me about my art project from last month," Owen added. "Most adults forget things like that. And he doesn't talk to us like we're little kids," Tristan said. "He asks our opinions about things and acts like what we think matters." Teresa felt a complex mixture of emotions. Gratitude that someone was giving her children the attention they craved. Jealousy that it wasn't someone she had chosen. And a growing suspicion that Joseph's approach was calculated to show her exactly what kind of father he could be. That afternoon, she made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of confronting Joseph or forbidding the boys from participating in the reading program, she decided to observe. She arrived at the school early and positioned herself where she could see into the library through the glass doors. What she witnessed over the next hour challenged every assumption she had made about Joseph's motives. He wasn't performing for an audience or trying to impress anyone. He was simply being present with three children who clearly adored him. When Owen struggled with a difficult word, Joseph waited patiently instead of jumping in to help. When Gareth got excited about a story and started talking rapidly, Joseph listened with genuine interest instead of redirecting him back to the lesson. When Tristan asked a question that revealed how deeply he thought about everything, Joseph treated the question with the respect it deserved. Most telling of all, when a crying kindergartner wandered into the library looking for her teacher, Joseph immediately shifted his attention to helping the lost child, showing Teresa's sons by example how to be kind to those who needed assistance. Watching Joseph interact with her children, really seeing him through their eyes, Teresa began to understand something that terrified her. Her sons weren't just responding to Joseph because they were starved for male attention. They were responding to him because he was genuinely good with children, patient and kind and interested in who they were as individuals, which meant that letting him into their lives might actually be what was best for them, regardless of what it cost her emotionally. That realization kept her awake most of the night, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out how to protect her children's hearts, while acknowledging that they might need something she couldn't give them alone. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Principal Hayes called to request a meeting, and Teresa arrived at the school office with a sense of dread. "Mrs. Newman," Principal Hayes said, gesturing for Teresa to sit down, I wanted to discuss Mr. Morgan's volunteer work with your sons. Teresa braced herself for the worst. Has there been a problem? Quite the opposite, actually. In the 3 weeks since he started working with them, all 3 boys have shown remarkable improvement, not just in reading, but in confidence and classroom participation. Tristan has started raising his hand more often. Gareth has been more focused during lessons, and Owen seems less anxious overall. Teresa felt a confusing mixture of relief and resentment. That's good to hear. The thing is, Principal Hayes continued, Mr. Morgan has requested to expand his volunteer hours. He'd like to help with homework tutoring and possibly assist with our after-school programs. Given the positive impact he's had, I'm inclined to approve his request, but I wanted to make sure you were comfortable with increased involvement. What exactly would that mean? Teresa asked. He'd be here more often, perhaps daily, helping various students with different subjects. Your boys would likely interact with him more frequently, though not exclusively. He seems particularly passionate about helping children who are struggling academically or socially. Teresa realized she was at a crossroads. She could refuse and explain that Mr. Morgan was actually the father her children had never met, which would create a scandal and potentially traumatize the boys. Or she could allow the increased involvement and try to manage the situation on her own terms. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course. But Mrs. Newman, I have to say, in 20 years of education, I've rarely seen a volunteer who connects with children the way Mr. Morgan does. Whatever else might be complicated about the situation, he genuinely cares about those boys. That evening, Teresa sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and tried to make sense of her feelings. Part of her was still angry about Joseph's deception. Part of her was grateful that her children were thriving. And a small, traitorous part of her was beginning to remember why she had fallen in love with him in the first place. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Hello? Teresa, it's me. Joseph's voice was careful, respectful. I know you're probably furious about the volunteer situation, and I understand if you want me to stop. But I needed to tell you something first. What? She asked warily. I never expected to feel this way about them. I thought being around them would satisfy some abstract sense of paternal obligation, help me feel less guilty about missing their early years. But Teresa, I love them. Not because they're my biological children, but because of who they are as people. They're funny and smart and kind, and spending time with them is the best part of my week. Teresa's throat tightened. Joseph, I'm not trying to manipulate you or earn points or prove anything. I just needed you to know that whatever you decide, these past few weeks have been the most meaningful of my life. Thank you for raising children I can be proud of, even though I had no part in making them who they are. Before Teresa could respond, he hung up, leaving her, alone with her thoughts and the growing realization that the battle she was fighting might no longer be about protecting her children. From their father, it might be about protecting herself from the possibility of forgiveness. The story isn't over yet, my beautiful family. A powerful part 2 will be uploaded in just 5 hours. If you want part 2, make sure to subscribe to this channel, like the video, and comment, "We want part 2." Bye for now, until the next video.